Good evening, everybody. I'm Chris Lockwood, Director of the National English Honour Society, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this special webinar with Angie Cruz, award-winning author of How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, our 2025-2026 NEHS Common Reader. A quick note on logistics before we begin. We are using StreamYard this evening. The chat is open for your comments and reactions, but Angie will only be responding to questions that you all submitted during registration. A quick thanks to Naaman Kent and Katie Murd for their work behind the scenes to make this event possible. And now I'm delighted to introduce tonight's interviewer, Tonantzin Rodriguez. Tonantzin teaches English 3 and AP English Language and Composition at West Covina High School in California, where she inspires students to think critically, write with purpose, and embrace the power of literature. As advisor of the NEHS Akura chapter, she fosters a vibrant community of readers and writers, curating texts that reflect her students' identities, while opening doors to new perspectives. Beyond school, Tonantzin serves on the NEHS Advisory Council, helping shape the organization's vision and programming to elevate student voices worldwide. Through her teaching and leadership, she makes a true connection, source of empowerment and change amongst her students. Tonantzin, thank you for everything that you do for NEHS, and over to you.
Thank you, Chris. So today we would like to welcome Angie Cruz, who is an amazing novelist and editor. Her most recent novel, How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, was a finalist for the 2024 Neustadt International Prize for Literature, shortlisted for the Aspen Words Literary Prize, winner of the Gold Medal Latino Book Award, the Isabel Allende Most Inspirational Book Award, long-listed for the Joyce Carol Oates Literary Prize, and chosen for the New York Times 100 Notable Books of 2022 and the Washington Post Most 50 Notable Works of Fiction. Her novel, Dominicana, was the inaugural book pick for the Good Morning America Book Club and shortlisted for the Women's Prize, long-listed for the Andrew Carnegie Medals for Excellence in Fiction and the Reference User Service Association Notable Book, and the winner of the American Library Association and Young Adult Library Service Association Alex Award in Fiction. It was named Most Anticipated and Best Book in 2019 by Times, Newsweek, People, Oprah Magazine, The Washington Post, The New York Times, and Esquire. Cruz is the author of 2 other novels, Soledad and Let It Rain Coffee, and the recipient of numerous fellowships, residencies, and awards, including the 2025 USA Fellowship, the Poets and Writers for Writers Award, and the John Dos Passos Prize for Literature. Angie Cruz, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and be in conversation with you.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, let's start with our first question. So it comes from Sophia in Mexico and Emerald in New Jersey. And they ask, when did you first begin thinking about writing How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water?
Oh my God. So in 2017, thank you for the question. In 2017, I was feeling a lot of despair with our government and thinking about what is going to happen to immigrants in this country. What is going to happen to me? I actually was in a position where I might have lost my job myself at that time. So what I did is think about what other careers would I be good at aside from writing. I've been writing for 20 years. And at this point of my life, I was like, oh, what else could I do with writing? And I ended up that day, I'm waiting for the train. I'm in New York City visiting my mother, because at the time I lived in Pittsburgh. And I was on a train and I saw this woman older than me, maybe 10 years older than me, studying English and preparing for something. And I thought, okay, she reminded me so much of my tias, my mother, my grandmother, who were all laid off during the Great Recession in 2008, all of them. It was like, it's a moment that, we don't maybe remember. Many of you are high school students. You don't see what was going on. But in 2008, many people were laid off. Many of the factories were shut down and sent elsewhere. And I found myself thinking, okay, if they could do it, so can I, right? But I was feeling despair. And while I was standing on the train, literally, Cara Romero came to me and said, "You want me to tell you something about myself? I'll tell you something. My name is Cara Romero, and I came to this country because my husband wanted to kill me." And what that made me feel in that moment was like, I need to listen to this voice, wherever it was coming from, this voice. Because what's great about it, and I hope there's some writers there or emerging writers out there, artists, is that in moments where you feel life is really tough, art comes in to save you, you know? And I feel like Cara Romero, her voice, her wisdom, even though it's me speaking to myself, channeled a way for me to think about how to move forward in a moment in my life where I felt it was very difficult. So the inspiration of the book really was that.
That's amazing. You're right. Those little moments that just hit a lot harder. That's amazing. Oh, wonderful. So our next question comes from Nishita from North Carolina, Kayla Terry from Maryland, and Christopher from Arkansas. And is, which authors, particularly Latinx, have inspired you?
I mean, you know, I've been inspired by many Latina writers. I would say that in my formative years, when I was still in high school, I had not read any Latina writers. Like, I was probably the only writer that is Latin American was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who was a real influence. If you haven't read him, I highly recommend him, because he sort of straddled politics, reality, and the impossible, which we will now call it magic. And I learned a lot about what could happen in fiction through him. But Latin writers in the United States that I read in college that I really, really felt inspired me were Elena Maria Viramontes. She wrote this beautiful short story collection called The Moths and Other Stories. And Under the Feet of Jesus is her novel. And Sandra Cisneros, obviously, who I know now most kids are required to read as middle schoolers, House of Mango Street and Woman Hollering Creek. And I guess more recently, like, there's it's like a boom of Latina writers that are doing such incredible work. And I'm just going to plant the names here just in case there's anybody who read my book and they're dying to read another one. There's Cleves Natera, who published just recently a book called The Grand Paloma Resort, that also speaks about the Dominican community. There's Patricia Engel, Colombian writer, who wrote this beautiful book about immigration called Infinite Country. But I definitely think that this is the moment. If you are interested, just Google Latina writers and you'll find so many wonderful, wonderful books.
Well, you just gave me my next book. So, so looking at our next question, how do you approach your writing process for your novels?
You know, it's funny because I think every time I start a book, I start very differently, right? So when I first wrote my first book, Soledad, I was in a classroom in college. I didn't even know I wanted to be a writer. And this is why I say save everything you write, because I think sometimes someone will say something and you'll make a note and maybe you're not ready to write the thing at that moment. But 5 years later, this sentence that I wrote in a literature class while I was studying at SUNY Binghamton. It was, her name was Soledad. Her mother gave her this name because she never wants to be alone. And I literally thought, okay, my first novel, there's going to be this girl named Soledad. And who is this girl who is battling, you know, what it means to move alone as a Latina in New York City? So that's the way that started. But, you know, every process is very different. I don't have any rituals. I definitely feel like in the past, I used to listen to more music, but now sometimes I find that I need complete quiet and know that I have no distractions. I feel like a lot of people that want to write and don't write, For those of you who are thinking about writing, you can't wait for inspiration. You just have to sit down in a place and just decide to do it. Put on a timer for 30 minutes and see what happens. Sometimes I do that and something happens and I just go with it.
Do you have any structure, or do you maybe an outline or
No.
an idea in your head? No?
Usually, I mean, like with Cara Rome, like her voice was very strong. And I would say that the reason her voice was so strong is because right before I wrote How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, I had done, a decade really worth of research interviewing people about their lives because, the working class Dominican community in New York City is very underrepresented in the archives. So in order to find what happened in the 1960s, I didn't live in the 1960s. So for me to write a book about the 1960s, I had to just ask everyone that lived in New York City from all walks of life. Like, what was your experience in this neighborhood? Like, when you think of Dominicans, like, what do you think about? Like, did you know anyone that was here? What was their story? I went into neighbors and homes that were Dominican that had arrived to New York City in the 60s and 70s. And I looked at their photo albums and asked them questions. And somehow in all that asking the questions and hearing people's story, I realized that a lot of them were talking about 2008. Because, when you're 70 and 80, 1960 feels pretty far away. Or 1970 feels pretty far away. But 2008 felt very recent, right? Like, it was the moment where so much changed for people, right? They went from working in a factory for 26 years, like Gara, to not working and not knowing if they're going to be able to pay their bills or if they're going to be able to survive. So that moment really catalyzed a whole different way of moving in the community. And so when I think about like how story comes, I think of voice, right? Like I hear the voices. Sometimes it's research, sometimes it's reading the news. So for example, like sometimes I'll see a headline and I don't know why it sticks with me. I'll just cut it out or I'll type it up and I'll put it in a notebook. And what I call it is like our own, it's almost like we have to create our own dictionary of visuals and ideas and the ephemera of the world, right? So then one day when we're ready to write that novel, we have it.
Oh, I love that. So do you have just books and folders of just inspiration there?
Well, every book has had a different methodology. So for Let It Rain Coffee, which was my second novel, I had a lot of notebooks and clippings. For Dominicana, obviously, I started an Instagram archive of images and stories that people were sharing with me, and that was part of my research. But to be honest, with How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, it was a really difficult time in my life. I did not have time to write. I was functioning as a single mother. I was working full time. I had multiple jobs at the time, trying to figure out how I was going to keep going. And I decided that every time I got on a train or a bus or a plane, I would write on my phone the novel. I would channel this voice, Cara Romero's voice, and ask her a question and see what she said to me. And what I realized very quickly is how much time we spent moving, commuting, going from place to place. And it used to be that we would, read a book, which I used to read a book on the train, but somehow with the phone, I even realized that it became like a nothing time, like a doom scrolling time, I took that time back. I said, that hour of the day, if I'm in a car and I'm driving, I'm going to listen to a book. If I am on a train or bus, I'm going to type up a story. I'm going to type up a scene. Because I feel like one of the problems right now, I'm a professor at a university, is that we're deeply distracted, right? So how do we retrain ourselves to really use our time? People say, I don't have time. And then when I break down how they're spending their time, I was like, oh, you're spending your time literally we're losing 3 to 6 hours a day doing passive behavior, right? So, so I think like every book has, so this book really was written, the first draft on the phone, and then I had to sit down on a computer and fix it and delete, and organize it and, turn it into a novel. But I think every book had its own methodology.
Oh, and you are so right about wasting time. I'm there. Me too. Me too. Thank
I
you.
think we're all struggling. It's a fight. Yeah.
It is, definitely, for sure. So our next question comes from Suli from New York. She asks, when writing a novel, how do you choose what experiences of yours will make it into the writing? And then what? And then what do you leave out?
I mean, the thing is that, when you're a writer, your job is to notice things, right? So I feel like I'm constantly taking notes. Every experience feels valuable in me understanding the human condition, right? Good and bad. And what I leave out, what I keep in, in some ways, everything I've written is my emotional autobiography, even if it has nothing to, I don't know what it's like to be, Cara Romero at all. But I will say that I do know what it's like to feel like I don't have a job, right? I'm not in her position, but I do understand what it's like to feel estranged from family. Like all these emotions that you experience, is it heartbreak or grief? You suddenly start to access those things and put them into your work, into your characters. So I definitely feel that as writers, we do have a responsibility to be ethical, right? We're not here to mine other people for their experiences. And what I mean about ethics is that if something's going to hurt somebody, really think deeply if it's that important to tell that story. Sometimes you're going to hurt someone and it's justified, but maybe. But I think that the ethics, and I think that we're now in the generation of ethics, right? Like we're thinking really carefully, like, wait, is this my story to tell? Is it their story to tell? I feel like with the books that I'm writing in particular, like How Not to Drown and Dominicana, Dominicana was inspired by a photograph of my mother, even though the novel is very different than my mother's life. But part of the reason I wrote that book is because every time I asked my mother about her childhood, it was so traumatizing. She wouldn't tell me anything about it. So I had to write a fiction to imagine what it could look like, right? But that novel was made from many, many, many stories I heard of other young women who were married and brought to the United States at a very young age. So when she read the book, and she read it before it was published, she said to me, I was so nervous. I was like, oh my God, what is my mother going to think about my work? Like, how does she see herself? And she basically said, I don't remember my childhood, but you gave me memories that fill in the blanks, right? Like it feels very true to me, even though it's not her story. And this is what's so beautiful about literature. And this is why we read, because unlike TV or any kind of entertainment that we do when we're reading or watching a movie, is that reading gives us time and intimacy with someone that's not like us, but it is like us, right? Like we might not have grown up in Ireland or lived in Russia during the war, or, but when you read a book, like James Joyce Dubliners that talks about the working class, like that was a highly influential book for me, right? When I was in high school, maybe I didn't read Latin writers, but when I read James Joyce Dubliners, I saw something about my experience in there that helped me understand, one, that I was not alone, two, that we have a lot in common as people in the human race. And it's beautiful. And I'm so glad. I think that more people are reading now that, phones are, I just read an article in the New York Times that phones are being banned in most high schools. And it's kind of creating a reading culture, like so instantly. I don't understand, but okay. I'll take it.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying. In reading your book, it brought back memories from my own family, and it was this amazing connection it's like, oh my gosh, this is also feels like my story, even from a different culture, but still Latina. But it was that empathy also that creates in reading.
I
Beautiful.
cannot tell you how many letters, Tonatine, where someone will write to me and say, I am not Dominican, but Cara Romero is me. Like, I have so many, from older white men in Colorado to like, someone in India, like, will literally say, I know this person. This is my mother. This is my grandmother. This is my tia. This is my neighbor. This is me. Like, it's amazing. And I think that that's what, that's what I read for in literature, really, like to think about, oh yeah, like there's a way where we do connect, even though our communities are so segregated and there's so much tension. We actually have a lot to share, and literature does do that work. If we read it, it does do that work.
Yes, it does. So our next question comes from Emmanuel. It says, is it difficult to motivate yourself into working or writing, or does it come naturally?
Oh my God, it's so hard. It's so hard to get up every day and do the work. I mean, I think that sometimes, I don't even want to create a myth that it's easy, because it isn't. I also have a high school age child who, like we together always talk about, like, how do we self-motivate to get the work done? And I feel like the thing that has helped me motivate is to really find people and community that helps me get there. Because I think one of the real myths is that people who seem motivated do it by themselves. And it's not true.
Agreed.
There's when you break it down, when someone seems like they're doing everything and getting things done, they have an army of help. When I break it down, they might not know they have. Some people go around acting as if they don't have an army of help. But then you break it down, you're like, oh, your mother made you breakfast? Oh, like your dad drove you? Oh, you mean the counselor like nominated you for that? Like, then you start looking at all the little things that help you get A done and B done and C done, right? So, and sometimes it's your friend who tells you, just try for it, right? So like, my thing is that I feel like what motivates me is really that I have learned that if someone brings down my energy, I move away from them. And if someone lifts my energy and I feel like I can say what I want, and they'll give me the space to hold it, they encourage me and they make me feel good about myself and empowered, I nurture those relationships. And what does that mean? Check in on them, share your stuff, invite them to do things, you know what I mean? And I think, like, as a younger person, I didn't really understand how important that was. But now this is what, I have a lot of energy. And I think people say, where do you get your energy from? I said, the people that I surround myself with.
And so important, more than ever, I feel like.
Yes.
Okay. So our next question comes from Nicole from New Hampshire. Says, and this kind of goes off what you were talking about a little bit. Says, what are some strategies you use to help maintain a healthy work and life balance?
Definitely, like, I grew up with, both my parents are Dominican immigrants. They came in here to the United States, and had to work very hard. So it was very normalized to work 4 or 5 jobs, plus have to do everything you have to do at home, plus go to school, plus. So I feel that I got very bad habits where I overworked myself, and that just causes burnout. So I had to learn, and I see this in a lot of young people too. I teach at Columbia University now, and I see that, we end an event. Yesterday, I ended an event at 8, and they were like, well, we have 3 more meetings until 12 a.m. And I said, wow, this is a lot. Like, when does this stop, right? But they want to do everything, and they feel like they're always catching up. So my sense is that, you have to make a list of what is really important that you put somewhere. And you're like, okay, what's important is that I take care of my body. Have I done anything to take care of my body today? Right. If you haven't, you cancel the thing that doesn't take care of you. And you do that because if your body's not working, if you haven't fed yourself, if you haven't taken a moment to just check in and make sure that you're okay, you can't do everything else well. Right. Yes. So that's the first thing. And then like, if you want to be a writer, or you're like there's the long-term dreams, there's like putting out fires, right? I need to do this for my class, whatever. Those are the putting out fires. But then the long-term dreams, like I want to write a book. Nobody cares really if I write another book. Like it would be nice. I think my agent might be happy and, maybe some readers will be excited, but that really I have to make time for because no one really is like, oh, in 3 years, you'll have another book. Like we don't have the attention span to hold that. Like, so what we need, look, what I do is I literally block time out in my schedule. Like I'll say, okay, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays from 10 to 1, those are the hours where I work on my long-term goals, right? You have to make time because those things are important, but they don't feel important every day because every day will offer you something. Oh, my friend is having a heartbreak. Cancel everything. Let's hang out. You know what I mean?
There's always something.
There's always something,
Great. Yeah, definitely that list. I need it. I need it daily. It helps me get through it all. So you mentioned a little bit about some of your characters, but are there any of your characters that are based off of real people in your life?
No, I mean, I think no, because the thing about fiction, for all of you writing fiction, and this, is that even if you try, like I'm a fiction writer. I wish I was a nonfiction writer because I have so much great story that's not fiction. But honestly, every time I try, I've been asked to write essays. I'll start writing an essay and it's supposed to be about something that actually happened. And then it takes off into a whole other direction because I love to use my imagination. I just go off, right? So I think like, even if, like I was saying about How Not to Drown, like in a way, Cara Romero is a fictional character. Yes, I do know someone who lost, whose son left, and she was devastated by it. Like I do know, but honestly, like all these things are really kind of like a conglomeration of experience in life and things that I'm curious about and interested, because I'm really interested in writing about what I don't know, but also what I want to know, right? Like I'm like, why is a person like that? Like, Cara Romero, like she's not really a likable character. I mean, she's a lovable character. Like we love her, but we don't really like a lot of the things she does, right? Like she kind of like, I think, I don't know what you think, Tonati, but in a way, she's kind of she's terrible. She's infuriating, right? I don't know anyone like that, but I know a lot of people like that. So that's the way where I think fiction lives, is in the impossible possible.
Yeah, there was a couple of times where I was getting frustrated, but in the end, I just had to love her. And I think there's so much of her just reminded me of all the women in my family, just this amalgam of them. And it was actually very beautiful to see. So, but yes. The next question. So I love this one. So Alexa from New York says, in an interview, she heard you mention how you would hear Cara speaking to you in the process of writing your novel. So can you further explain how you felt? So you touched a little bit on this, but how you felt that, and do you sometimes still hear her?
I do. Sometimes I still hear her. Like I would say out of all the characters I've ever written, she's the strongest. And, and in a way, that's why it was written in monologue, because, like sometimes I'll have an experience and I'm like, ooh, this would be fun to write in Cara's point of view, right? Like I could keep in her point of view, I kind of could tell any story and I think it would be hilarious and poignant and significant. but I had to let her go because I don't know if I have another book in me with that voice. But maybe, because a lot of people come around to it. Yeah. But I do hear her sometimes. She does come to me. She makes me laugh.
Makes you laugh.
The side of me that makes myself laugh. We all have that side.
We do. We do. Another student wrote and asked if you would ever write or consider writing the story from Fernando's point of view.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting exercise. And I actually just assigned that exercise in my class, in one of my creative writing classes, where I said, okay, now take the story you wrote and write it from the point of view of a character that doesn't have a voice, just to see what the response is. And it's really, I think Fernando's story is incredibly important. I would consider it. I just don't feel like I have access yet to that experience in a way that I think I could do it justice. But whoever's asking this question, I think if they really resonated with Fernando and wished Fernando had voice, they should start writing this story.
Oh, that's perfect. I love that. So the next question from Julia, she says, though not from the same background, I recognize many of the characters in your novel as similar people. I know. What do you think is universal about your characters in reflection with people's, especially immigrants' experiences around the world?
Right. So, the rule in a lot of fiction is the specific is universal, right? So when you're writing, you might hear your teacher say, the more specific you are, the more universal. A lot of times people think broad statements reach more people, but actually more specific you are, the more universal the character becomes, the more people will connect to it, right? Which feels weird. Like, how is it that a character that's so specific, like Cara Romero living in Washington Heights in 2008, who just lost her job, could reach so many people on an emotional level? It's because it's incredibly specific, right? Now, how do you write that? For those of you who want to write these characters, and you're like, well, how do I get there? Well, there's this wonderful, wonderful video. It's free. You can go online by George Saunders, who's an incredible writer. It's called On Story. And in there, he talks about revision is love in progress. So if you think about revision as a pain in your butt, right? With people, like, I know my students are like, oh my God, I don't want to revise again. I just want to move on, right? Like, that is young energy. Young energy is like, I wrote it, I bounce. But if you think about revision as an opportunity to love your character more, to love your place more, the place you're writing about more. So for example, my books, like Cara Romero, you say, oh, she was lovable in the end. The first few drafts, she was not lovable, right? But what happens is when you really look at anyone with curiosity and care, anyone, this is a practice you could do with anyone, because storytelling is also every conversation you have with everybody you meet, by the way, right? And every person you're engaging. You go on a date, you're telling a story. You go visit your mom, you're telling them another story. We're telling stories all the time. But imagine going into those conversations thinking, before you say the thing you want to say to them, revising it with curiosity and care. What can happen in that conversation? It's the same thing with writing. You write a sentence, and then you look at it and you say, how can I love this sentence more? How can I love the subject of this sentence more? How can I love what is happening more? And then you rewrite it and you rewrite it. And then you get to that place where you write something that is so specific and clearly only yours, that nobody else could have written it, right? Because every time you write a sentence, you're putting a little bit of yourself in there, right? This is why everyone's so panicked about AI. I said, yeah, let the people that want to be robots be robots. But those of you out there who really, really, really are interested in being whole human beings, you know that when you write a sentence or you read a sentence that explodes, it's like an explosion. You're reading into another person's soul, literally. You know?
Yes, definitely. So how do you stay true to the authenticity of your marginalized characters?
Well, first, I don't think of them as marginalized. I think of them as central, right? So this is, I think everybody is the center of their own story. Everybody is the protagonist. I am the protagonist of my own story because I am telling it, right? So I am, and if we start this is why I think everyone should do more creative writing and storytelling, because when you learn how to write story, you understand, okay, who is the character that is going to have the main transformation? If it's you living your life, you're the lead. You're always the lead, right? So the better you become at stories, the better you become at problem solving. And not only do we write the stories, reading the stories, we learn that, right? Reading, you're like, how did they get here from here, right? So when I think about marginalization, I'm like, marginalized to whom, right? Like I'm borrowing from a famous quote by Toni Morrison about Invisible Man, right? Where she talks a lot about the white gaze, right? She says that he didn't write that book for me. I mean, not that she didn't love the book, right? Like, I'm not sure how she felt about the book, but it's like when you write a title like Invisible Man, you know that it's not being addressed to her as a Black woman, because she's saying invisible to whom, right? So for me, when I'm writing, I don't think Gara Romero is marginalized. I think she's very central to her own story, right? And I think that's, I gave an example yesterday at a talk where someone was, I had an experience where I went to someone's house and they said, oh, it's just going to be us three, right? And they were from a different class. And I was like, oh, okay. So I woke up the next morning and I thought it was just us for the weekend at this house. And then when I woke up, there were like 5 people working in the house doing different things, right? Someone was the nanny, the other was the housekeeper, the other was like the doing the grounds. And I said, oh my God, she didn't include that those 5 people are also in the story.
Yeah.
But they're people that are listening, participating, facilitating, right? So when you start thinking about who's outside, who's inside, right? It's a really important question, right? And a lot of times when you read books and you know that you're reading from the outside, like you're looking in, right? And sometimes you feel like you're in the inside of the story because maybe you know the language. For example, like there's a lot of Spanish in a lot of my books. And some people say, well, don't you feel like you're going to estrange the reader? And I'm like, no, I have read many books that have French and Russian in them, and I never felt estranged. I felt like people who knew those languages had an inside that I didn't have, but that's okay. I still got it,
Wow, I love that comment about that she's not marginalized. As it's funny because I hear it a lot, and I think it just comes into language and conversation. But you're right, and it's something that I think that's a takeaway for everybody listening, including myself, that using that word and what that does, and where we get it from, and how we label people that way.
It's
It
very,
matters.
very important that we think about how we're using language, because right now the narrative, right? Sometimes we accept the narrative and think this is the way the world is, but actually we change the world through the way we talk about it. So when you talk marginalized, you forget, like I am from New York City, right? In New York City, 10% of the community is Dominican, right? 10% of New York City. We have 1 million people here that are Dominican identified. Most people, when they think of New York City, do not imagine that 1 out of 10 people they're meeting are Dominican. 6 or 7% are Puerto Rican. Like, think about it. Okay, you go up, you don't think of New York that way because the story of New York is not that New York. So to say that Cara Romero is marginalized in New York City is kind of crazy because there's so much of us. We're everywhere, right?
Yeah. Wow. Yes.
The language. So by us shifting the language, there's a lot of power there, right? Everything around gender and class, the majority of the people in this country are either living in poverty or working class. The majority, right? To see it as, underrepresented in college, perhaps. In many universities, we're still seen as an underrepresented community. So like to shift the language actually will transform the world. I really believe this. And we do this through reading.
Yes. Wow. It's amazing. So Mallory from Arkansas asks, what was the most difficult thing for you to write about in your novel?
The most difficult. In How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water. Interesting. I'm trying to think what was the most difficult. I think, that's a good question, because this novel to me felt very, it was probably the novel that came to me most quickly than all the other books I've ever written. I think the difficult part for me was as a mother, so I'm a mother to a 17-year-old. And when I was writing, he was 13, right? And I think that when I was writing the book, I would always read it out loud, right? And there was a section, I'm going to give you an example. There was a section of the book where Cara throws the iron at the kid, right? And I was reading it, and he said, "You know what, Mom?" He was listening to me. I thought he was like scrolling the phone, but he's like, "You know what, Mom? I have something to say about your book." And I said, "What? What do you have to say?" Because I would always read it out loud. And that's another thing that helps with writing, is reading your work out loud, because then you could catch what's wrong with it. But I was reading it out loud, and he said, because the first draft, she threw it intentionally at him. She said, "If you throw the iron intentionally at Fernando, the reader will never forgive you or Cara. But if you throw it by accident, without meaning to hit him, then you understand that she's angry, but that she doesn't want to hurt her son. She just wants to stop him from leaving."
Wow.
And that was my kid. He was 13 years old, right?
Wow. That's.
So in a way, like, I think the difficulty for me was like, okay, how do I write about a mother who's not me, right? Who is listening to her kid, who totally accepts him for everything that he is, and channel this kind of rage and trying to control him. I think that probably was the most difficult.
So was there anything, so another member asked, Brandy from Florida, well, was there a scene you wrote for your book that you loved but had to cut?
Why? Because the book is so short. Let me see. Was there a scene that I loved that I had to cut? No, not for the book, but for the movie. I just finished the screenplay adaptation. I'm working with this wonderful writer, Aurora Guerrero. We're working on the screenplay, and it was, we had to cut a lot. So like, there's aspects of the book that are not going to make the movie, but I can't tell you what they are. And the reason is because the movie is only an hour and a half. And it was impossible to include all the storylines, but there was some of my favorite storylines, like, definitely could not make the book.
Oh, okay. Now I'm very excited that there's going to be a movie. Wow.
Stay tuned. If you follow my Instagram, I'll probably be posting on it in the next 6 months. So.
Oh, that's exciting. Definitely. Well, I know where I'll be taking my National English Honor Society members. So our next question comes from Vanessa from Georgia. She says, do you think the workhorse mentality that tends to be associated with Hispanic Latino community has shifted since the pandemic?
because there's so much quiet quitting, maybe. I don't know. I mean, workhorse. I think there's still people working very, very hard because it's become so difficult to make a living. That's what I've noticed. Like, I do think work has changed, but during pandemic, at least in New York City, I could say that, you know, a lot of my extended family and my community, I saw them. I was at Washington Heights when pandemic was happening. Most of them were essential workers. You know, I love that that word even exists now, essential workers. You know, I don't think we thought of them as essential, but they were the ones that were on the front line, literally making deliveries, getting food to people, nursing at the hospitals, like elder care. And those jobs, they were still hustling a lot, you know. And I think now what I'm noticing is that a lot of people have multiple jobs to pay for groceries and inflation and all the extra costs. So I feel like it's interesting because there's like this narrative about pandemic, you know, taught us to take care of ourselves more. And I think that's true. We kind of were able to sort of stop a little bit and see like our work patterns and things have changed. But I think most people are still, it's a real struggle to survive right now. And I'm very lucky. I have a job. I'm a tenured professor. I'm protected for a while, I guess, but not indefinitely, who knows? But I do think that most people are really, you know, I know numerous people who have lost their insurance, like, so they have to work a lot. Yeah. So I don't know. I think maybe it went up, the amount of work.
Feels like it sometimes.
Yeah.
So another member asked, Amy from Pennsylvania, she's like, because you did talk about doing research for your novel. She asked, did you spend time in Washington Heights to do research? And then what is the spirit of the place you were trying to capture?
So I was born and raised in Washington Heights. And, you know, I lived in and out of it the past 20 years because I had a position at Texas A&M, and then I worked at University of Pittsburgh. I'm now back in New York City, but I've also, you know, I have a huge extended family that still lives in Washington Heights, so I spent a lot of time there. So I did research, living research, but I also, there's a wonderful institute, Dominican Studies Institute in CUNY and City College. I read a lot of newspapers. There's a lot of great scholarship now, recent scholarship in the past 15, 20 years about the history of the Dominican Republic. I visited Dominican Republic, the archives. I interviewed a lot of people because, again, like I said, the working class in particular and women have been grossly underrepresented in the archives, official archives. So I think, like, you know, all of that. And yeah, and I think that, you know, research is it's fun. Again, you know, sometimes it feels like work, like, why are they making me research? But like, you know, if you're someone that goes into holes online for your own curiosities, that's all research is. And my curiosity was, you know, why is the world the way it is? And I would go look for it. I loved history books and, you know, and I didn't do it because it was required. I did it because literally I was following the questions I had about the world and my life. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, because I feel like the skills that we're learning in school sometimes feel like, I don't know, like busy work. But in reality, what we're teaching people is the tools you need. So when you do have those questions and you're staying up all night ruminating, you actually can go and follow through on them and answer them.
That brings us to our next question. So Tanya Dixon from Texas, she says, what advice would you give a first-year student who might be an aspiring writer?
Read a lot and read widely, right? And trust, you know, I don't know. I think that one of the things I think probably led me to become a writer is I remember being in college and taking an African-American literature class. And I had a professor named Carol Boyce Davies, and I literally read the first book by a Black writer in my life. You know, I was like 19 years old, and it was Incidents of a Life of a Slave Girl. It's a wonderful slave narrative by Harriet Jacobs. And I remember going to her and saying, I've never read anything. Are there more like this? Like, ask your teachers, ask people who have more experience than you, and they can guide you, right? Because they've been doing this for a long time. And she literally was like, yes. And she gave me a book from her library, and I read it in a week, and she gave me another one. She gave me another one. And I think like that kind of mentorship is necessary, but also openness to what people are suggesting. Even if you think, well, am I going to like this? Try it. If they think you might like it, you might like it. You know, so I think reading widely, not just in your own niche, is really important.
Definitely. So she has a second part to her question. It says, how should today's college or university professor prepare and equip students for careers in writing?
Well, I think no one knows where it's going to go regarding writing or career. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think everyone's questioning what are the careers of the future, being that now AI is disrupting so many fields that used to be tried as like, oh, this is something you could actually do. But I'll tell you this, and I'm encouraging everyone to do the same, is follow your curiosity and passions, right? Like, if the more human your curiosity and passion is, the more likely you're going to be an anomaly in the world. And I think this is true. Like, literature, if you love literature, study English literature, like, or languages, or because I personally feel creativity, thinking outside the box, that's all writing is. And if you are focused on reading great books about writers' translations, like, you're equipping yourself for literally any career. So that would be my recommendation. Like, I tell my students that all the time. If I make you a better storyteller, that means that you'll know how to do a job interview and sell yourself in any capacity.
That's good. I like that. So another student asked Jennifer from Texas, she's like, when you were getting your MFA in creative writing, was there a specific thing that you learned that has stuck with you?
You know, when I went to do my MFA, the thing that I learned is ask for what I need. You might sometimes get it. And when I went to my MFA, this was back in 1987, I was one of the few Latin writers, definitely the only Latin writer that was working class in the entire program and in fiction. And I felt like lost and a little isolated. And I literally I just went and I asked the director of the program, and I said, you know, I need more community. I need more people that can read my work without reading it as marginalized literature, because at the time there was very little language around that. And she said, what do you need? I can offer you my space. We can do a call out. And I was able to start an organization, collective outside of the university to do that because I asked for help. So what I'm saying is, like, if you feel like, oh, I want to read more of this, why don't we have more of this at school? Ask for it. Like, you can advocate for your needs, and sometimes you might get them.
Right.
And I think that's what I learned being in an MFA. I've learned that, you know, throughout my life, that if there's something that you feel could be useful or you can't find it, go to a librarian. You know, librarians are like the smartest people in the world. Like, they know how to find every solution to every problem. I feel like, you know, ask people. I think that's not to be afraid to ask. The only, you know, people can say no and you just get over it.
Right. But if you don't ask,
you don't know.
Never know. Yeah. So Molly from Massachusetts asked, she's like, how does your work as a professor influence or impact your work as a writer?
You know, I feel like what I love about teaching is that I feel I'm always tapped into a generation that would be harder to be tapped into if I wasn't teaching them. So I really love teaching in that way. And I feel like, you know, when you get really good at something, like, you know, I've been writing for 25 years. So I feel like it comes to me in a way that it didn't when I was started 20 years ago. But because I have to teach it, it's like I'm doing the scales in the violin, you know, like I have to go back to the fundamentals and remember, oh yeah, that's what makes it work, right? So then when I'm writing, it's like I'm tuning up the piano or something. You know what I mean? Like it's like I'm re-engaging some of those muscles that have weakened because I forget that they're important, right? So that's what I feel teaching does. It kind of just helps us always remember, one, the delight of literature, because you see, like, people read a book for the first time and they love it. You're just like, magical, art matters, yay! I mean, I'm sure you feel this, Tonatine, because you teach. Like, you remember, like sometimes you're like, oh, the world sucks, nobody cares. And then someone will read a book and they'll like say, they want to be in conversation. And you're like, it matters. We should keep doing this work. So I think that's how it influences me. Because again, it helps me get up in the morning and do the work.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Speaking my language. So our next question is from Karen from Mexico and Addison from Texas. It's like, what part of the creative process is most daunting for you?
I think I love writing. I love producing my work. I love revising. I think the most daunting is when it's now public, right? Like I finished the book and then it's in the world. And I'm kind of like, well, I love my book. I don't want anyone to tell me that it's bad. I love my characters. Don't get mad at my characters. So I think like the daunting part is that you go from being in a cave in your imagination, in your creation, and it's so beautiful. I mean, I don't know if anyone's feeling inertia here or like defeated or really scared about the future, right? Like, I don't know, like who's listening and how you feel. But honestly, like, when we're in the cave and we're able to imagine and write fiction, especially, and get out of our heads, it is so fun, and joyous. And you just want to stay there, in that place. But then when it comes out, like when you have to put the work out in the world, you're reminded, oh, wow, like, maybe I said something that'll get this book banned. Maybe, you'll hear from people who don't like immigrants, and they don't think you deserve a space in the conversation. Maybe the work is failing and I have to go back and work on it again, which has happened. Like my books, actually, I rewrite them and rewrite them and rewrite them. They do not come out this way. I want to stress, I mean, How Not to Drown from beginning to end took about 5 years. Dominicana took 10 years. And I think this is important for people to know, because there's a difference between writing fast fiction and literature, which requires a lot more, again, revision and love.
Can you share how you handle when you get those negative comments or opinions coming toward you?
Okay, so, I think that sometimes some people will say things that I don't think are very productive, right? And you have to, what you learn is what is really useful and what is not useful, right? So anytime anyone spends any time reading your work, you should be so grateful, because it takes time. And I say this as someone who did not appreciate my teachers, because now that I realize that I have to read people's work, I'm like, wow, it takes time to read someone's work and try to help them improve their writing, right? So even if you don't agree with my note, what I usually ask my students is that I say, okay, what did you hear me say? I want you to repeat back what you think I just said about your work. And what ends up happening is that a lot of times people would say, you hate it, or it's not working. I totally messed up. And when that happens, you're like, oh, you didn't hear what I said. I didn't say that at all. What I meant to say, so you could go into the conversation. And this is why I think is really important. Like if you do have a problem with a note, to try to go and talk to someone about it, or have someone look at the note, because sometimes our defense mechanism is so high that immediately we're like, they hated it. I'm going to fail this class. This is terrible. So loud, that voice of either imposter or failure. And I'm like, okay, so the thing I do is I'm like, what are they really saying? They're not saying the book is a failure. They're saying that maybe this particular thing didn't pay off and there's things I can do, right? Mm-hmm. And then I go back into it, right? So again, it's about if the note is given with love and curiosity, right? Like I'm trying to help you do the best work you can do. And you listen and say, this person actually cares. Let me try to listen to what they're saying. You could disagree, but you better know how to defend your disagreement. You know what I mean? Like you can't just be like, well, I like it that way. You know what I mean? You better come up with another version of the story. Yeah.
That's good. So, because it's so personal. So asking, it's a great advice. So Katie from Massachusetts and Dawn from Georgia said, what advice would you give writers looking to get their first novel published?
So, that's the question I get asked the most. And I think that probably it's easier to publish a novel than it is to write one. So what I would say is that write the book, write the most excellent book you can write. And then there are many mechanisms to try to get published. It's hard to publish, but it's hard to write a book. And a lot of times people want to get there to the publishing part before they go through the writing part. And so I would say start with creative writing classes, start with reading lots of books. There's a lot of craft books that could support you. There's this great magazine called Poets and Writers then that you could look at. That, when I was 19 years old, I remember I looked up in Poets and Writers. They have classifieds of anthologies, and I submitted something I wrote in an anthology and it got published. So it happens, but I think the hardest part is writing the book, and no one wants to hear that, but it's true.
So we are at our last question. So it comes from Aaliyah from Illinois, and she says, what do you feel is the most effective way to get and keep readers interested in your work as a whole?
I think that, this is like a question of like, oh, I want people really to like me, right? Like if you move around in the world worried how many people are going to like you or like your posts or like your books, you're just going to be very unhappy. I don't think about that at all. I think my job is to write the best book I could possibly write and hope it reaches people. And I find like the great books, word of mouth is what keeps the longevity of a book. Like a book like How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, it actually goes up in interest with years because people, I think it resonates in a certain way, right? So, and then people tell other people, and, I'll have, students write to me and said, oh, I got my mom and sister to read it. And I said, really? Like, because they wanted to talk about it. So the way to make anything live is to keep talking about it, right? So I'm here, I'm talking to you all, but then you talk about it and then that amplifies it, right? Like you tell people you read it. But really the work hopefully should be the book itself. It has like its own legs. Literature has its own legs. That's why there's books that we're still reading from, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. Because in the end, when a book really matters, like, I think of a writer like James Baldwin. James Baldwin, who is a really important African-American writer, when his books came out, did not sell. Nobody really talked about them the way they talk about them now, his fiction. And during pandemic, he probably was one of the most widely read writers during pandemic. His voice from the 80s and 90s and 70s really, really came through during pandemic. If you can imagine that, right? So you don't write for this moment. You write a book that you just know is gonna sort of like find its legs and find its moment, and focus on just writing something beautiful.
Well, she has a second question for you, and then this is it. She said, are you writing, or what are you writing right now?
So I just finished a book, and it's set in Italy. So hopefully, I spend a lot of time in Italy. My son has his grandparents in Italy. So I go there every summer for the past 15 years. And I finally wrote a book set in Italy. It's about a Dominican in Italy, but it's in Italy.
Perfect. Well, looking forward to reading that one. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation.
It's been a joy, and thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Angie. Thank you, Tonatsin, and thank you all for joining us tonight and for sharing your questions. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel, which is at Sigma Tau Delta English. You can subscribe and you can click the bell for updates and more content. To purchase How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, you can visit the English Honor Society's bookshop page. Your purchase will support authors and independent bookstores. If you haven't read it, you really, really should. A quick reminder, NEHS seniors who are submitting scholarship essays on How Not to Drown must do so by October 14th at 11:59 p.m. That is Central Time. And if your chapter wants to read the novel together, our new book club kit is available both on the NEHS and Sigma Tau Delta websites. Finally, don't miss our next webinar with Gabrielle Zevin, author of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, on November 12th. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.